And third, advancing diplomacy on global issues, including climate. Surplus with our union has surpassed 300 billion euros last year. And this is, while it is getting harder and harder for European companies to do business in China. Our products are systematically discriminated in public procurement because of Beijing's Buy China policy. Goods and services that are made in China get an automatic 20% price advantage in public bids. This is simply not fair. The system is explicitly rigged. So we have taken action to rebalance the public procurement market for medical devices, for example, because it is a matter of basic reciprocity. Europe remains fundamentally open, but most of our companies are rapidly losing market share in China. We want to see tangible progress on our long-standing requests for market access. The same is true on state-subsidized overcapacity. China cannot rely on exports to solve its domestic economic challenges. Overcapacity must be addressed at its source. It cannot simply be offloaded onto global markets. That is the clear message behind our investigation into electric vehicles. Interestingly, we see that a serious debate within China on excessive production, disorderly price undercutting, and distorted markets has started. They understand that the domestic challenge cannot be solved at the expense of others. And let me be clear, if our partnership is to move forward, we need a genuine rebalancing, fewer market distortions, less overcapacity exported from China, and fair reciprocal access for European business in China. Honourable members, the second priority is to speed up with de-risking. China invested early in many of the technologies of the future, but then it started flooding global markets with cheap subsidized goods to wipe out competitors. Entire Western industries closed, from solar panels to mineral processing, leaving China to dominate. I have always spoken about China's domination of the rare earth permanent magnets market and how that can be used for economic leverage. And this is why we are developing alternative supply sources in close cooperation with our partners. Of course, dialogue with China is also essential. We're engaging with Beijing so that it loosens its export restrictions. Because, as I said at the outset, we do not believe in strategic decoupling, and this is not in our interest. I believe that for Europe it would be inefficient and ineffective. But we will continue to de-risk, because we have learned the extent to which dependencies are vulnerabilities and how tech, trade and security are inherently linked. De-risking is simply a matter of European independence. Honourable members, my next point is on geopolitics. Security is more interlinked between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific than it has been in several generations. And it is evolving rapidly. So it is in our interest to work together. But we also know that China's unyielding support for Russia is creating heightened instability and insecurity for Europe. We can say that China is de facto enabling Russia's war economy, and we cannot accept this. And I've always said how China continues to interact with Putin's war will be a determining factor for EU-China relations going forward. If China claims to defend the international rules-based order, then it should unequivocally condemn Russia's gross violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and internationally recognized borders, and act accordingly. And if China claims to defend multilateralism, then it must respect the rules and principles of international trade anchored in the WTO. Honourable members, my final point is about our cooperation to address climate change. While China is the largest emitter in the world with 30% of global emissions, clean energy also accounted for over 1/4 of China's GDP growth. China invested over $900 billion in clean technologies alone, more than the US, Europe, Japan, and India combined. Beijing is at once a staunch competitor in the clean tech race, and on the other hand, a vital partner for global decarbonization. This is the complexity we must deal with. We must switch gear in our competition, but also explore every avenue for cooperation. We are both convinced that the triple planetary crisis of climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution requires a strong multilateral framework. And we want COP30 in Belém to deliver ambitious results. We both see net zero targets and policies as a growth strategy and a real driver for industrial modernization. And we both see the opportunities to work closer together in sectors such as emission trading, carbon capture and storage, and the circular economy. Honourable Member, the point is that there's a lot we can do together if China is ready to work together in a spirit of predictability and reliability. Just like Europe, China is a continent-sized power. Just like our Union, it is a complex and fascinating giant. Our relationship must reflect this complexity. We will always defend our interests. We will de-risk our economies, but we do not want to decouple. And as we enter our second half century of cooperation, we know that China is changing. But this is also a new era for Europe, an independent Europe. So we are ready to build a more balanced and a more stable relationship and write a new chapter in this defining relationship. Long live Europe. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. I shall now open the debate, giving the floor to Mr. Pascual de la Parte for 1 minute 30 for the EPP.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, President of the Commission. Reciprocity, transparency, and respect of a level playing ground. These are to be the three principles upon which our relationship with China has to build up. First, on the security front, we cannot accept that China continues supporting and assisting Putin's Russia war of aggression against Ukraine. If China wants to be recognized as a big power, it has to assume also big responsibilities. It is a member of the Security Council. That means that he is supposed to be a guarantor of the peace and stability in the world. And you cannot guarantee the peace and stability in the world if you assist the war of aggression by Putin. Our relationship with China cannot be normalized as long as it continues supporting Putin's. First. Second, human rights. We cannot ignore that China disregards massively and grossly the human rights of racial minorities and religious minorities. We have to remind that. Third, trade and services. China has to abide by all the dispositions of the World Trade Organizations and not to select those it likes and disregard those it doesn't like. We know the pattern of behavior of China. They subsidize the industries in order to eliminate the competition, they get the monopoly, and they impose the conditions afterwards. Fourth, rare earths and raw materials, critical raw materials. We cannot accept the threat and the menace of control of exports of these raw materials. It goes against the rules of the World Trade Organization. By the way, at this particular point, it's not the responsibility of the Chinese only. We have renounced to exploit our own raw materials and rare earths because our dispositions on our green agenda that has to be reconsidered if we want not to depend entirely on China. Then reality, reciprocity, transparency and level playing ground. Thank you very much.
Grazie onorevole. Prego onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Maniatis, 1 minute 30 for the S&D.
Κυρία Πρόεδρε, κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the EU-China summit is going to take place at a significant time geopolitically. Our relationship with China is important yet complex. Bilateral trade is worth 57 billion euro per year. We have to defend our values, which are non-negotiable. We have to be realistic in terms of China's position in the world. China dominates the world in technology, for example. We have to stick with the One China policy, but our relationship with Taiwan is important from the point of view of technological resilience. Market distortion caused by state subsidies is not something that we can just sit by and watch. The European Commission needs to use all the tools at its disposal to ensure that we protect European manufacturing. And the restrictions on rare earth exports have affected our industries badly.
Per un minuto e mezzo.
Mr. Turch, 1 minute 30 on behalf of the Patriots Group.
De lo muy poco bueno que hizo.
In the previous Parliament, the European Parliament drew attention to our vulnerability as developed over previous decades due to giving way to China. There was this radical change of direction, and it gave rise to greater dependency and greater risks. Now it appears that we are embarking on the same path and making the same mistake twice. I would hope that we could trust Ms von der Leyen when she says she's going to take more of a distance now, but I'm not sure how much we can rely on that. Looking at what President Trump is doing, to then say, OK, let's replace the US with China, dictatorship, and draw attention to what's happening in Africa and so on. I think when we're dealing with the Chinese regime, we have to be extremely careful about not being bought by them. They've got a regime that just wants to impose itself. Look at how they've acted on other continents. This should be an alarm call for us when we see threats coming from Chinese diplomats to MEPs in their own house because they don't like us defending human rights in China, Taiwan, or anywhere else around the world. We want to have a sober, correct, reciprocal relationship with China. We've had enough of them just getting whatever they want from us without us getting anything in return. Thank you. Mr. Polato for the ECR.
Thank you, President. The fact that China is resorting to unfair trade practices is nothing new. Neither is the fact that these restrictions are coming at a very delicate point in time for our economy. The fact that it's our duty to react in a consistent manner to defend a genuine free market is now unavoidable. But this begs the question, how do we end up here? Following ideological visions, we've dismantled entire manufacturing sectors, such as the automotive sector, for the sake of future promises, which today are proving to be an uncomfortable reality. We've allowed entire strategic sectors to be held hostage by their dependency on third countries for critical raw materials. Pointing the finger at China is not enough. We have to take the occasion of the 50th anniversary of bilateral relations to reflect on the mistakes that we have committed in Europe over these years. It is time to change course. Our reaction has to stem from that which has made our economy great, the know-how, enterprise, manufacturing. We need a new industrial impetus. We need a European minerals policy which reduces our vulnerability. We need to put the real economy back front and centre. These are the responses that citizens expect from this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eroglu, 1 minute 30 for Renew.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau Vizepräsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner, President of the Commission, welcome to this House. We're talking about the summit at the end of the month. President von der Leyen, there are three things the Parliament can tell you, starting with the economy. We have been fighting for mining of rare earths in the European Union. We need more rare earth mining and other mining in the European Union. 98% of the rare earths we need come from China. 98%, that's a total dependency. The only way to put ourselves into a better negotiating position is to do our own mining. So we need a European mining program, a mining task force. Second, security policy. I think it's very important for you to tackle what the Chinese Foreign Minister told Mrs. Callas last week. We have to do something about that. We in the European Union have made mistakes. It's very important that we take advantage of our strengths, and that includes human rights, what our position is on human rights.
Thank you. Mr. Niinistö for the Greens Group for 2 minutes.
Madam President, let's not sugarcoat it. China isn't just restricting exports, it is testing Europe's weakness. 7 rare earth elements and 1 loud message. We control your clean tech. This is not about trade. This is geopolitical blackmail with magnets. The EU imports 98% of its rare earth magnets from China. That's not a supply chain, that's a stranglehold. We cannot walk into the EU-China summit begging for exemptions. That's not strength, that's surrender. We cannot be quiet about China's support to the Russian war economy, and we cannot be quiet about the deterioration of human rights in China. Therefore, our response to blackmail must be bold. Resilience, circularity, autonomy. We need to stop chasing virgin materials and start valuing what we already have. Recycle more, waste less, design better. Permanent magnets must be built to last and to be reused. Let's stop being naive. China has done this before. Weaponized rare earths in 2010. Now they're doing it again. So that means that we in Europe must de-risk seriously. Secure strategic stocks, enforce risk assessments, plan like it's already a crisis, because it already is. We have the tools and we have the laws. Now we need the political courage. And when we source materials from the global south, we must build on true partnerships. No extraction without consent, no transition built on exploitation. Let's not trade our climate future for cheap magnets. Let's build a circular, just and sovereign Europe. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shirvan for the Left Group for 2 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Madam President. I certainly welcome the fact that ahead of this Chinese-EU summit, we're looking at trying to have a bit of détente in the relationship, because we need to use a point of a departure here where we can face the challenges of China. And if you want to address the issues of humanity, poverty, injustice, then you need to look at the issues of war and peace, and you have to push for an international rules-based order. So the European Union has to do its homework to reach strategic autonomy. We need to have massive investments for the future in our industries, covering infrastructure, making sure that we have independent provision of energy and provision of essential services. We need to be able to react to China and the US on an equal footing. China is the second biggest trade partner with the EU after the US. If we want to have a trade war with them, it would be disastrous. It would risk losing thousands of jobs. We need to work in the name of helping people and helping trade, not large companies. Looking at future technologies and critical raw materials and strategic sectors, we need to address these issues, and hence, Ms. von der Leyen, it's not just a question of economic cooperation that you should be going to Beijing with, but also a specific diplomatic initiative, because for 3.5 years we've been experiencing war, and despite all the telephone calls from Trump and Xi Jinping and others to Putin, nothing has changed. Maybe China can help, but if you want to change history, come up with a joint European-Chinese peace initiative for Ukraine. China is the only international power that can move Putin to reason, and Europe has to work with China to get peace. Now is the time for diplomacy. Thank you very much.
Onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Aust, for the ESN Group, 1.5 minutes.
China is a country with 1.4 billion people, and its history goes back 3,000 years. You can't give lectures to a country like that. It would endanger global stability. China has always exercised strategic restraint. In 1999, a Chinese embassy was bombed in Belgrade during the Kosovo War. The Chinese leadership did not escalate. Europe should not turn itself into China's enemy. We need an external economic policy which is based on our interest, not wishful thinking. Europe must act together. Germany, France, Italy and Poland alone are too small. But we have to formulate our interests and defend them. We need partnership where possible and determination where necessary. And we need to show respect towards a self-confident partner. We need to reduce our dependence and extend a hand of cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That completes the contributions on behalf of the groups now. And we do need to move on to the Danish presidency debate later, so let's bear that in mind. We do have a catch-the-eye procedure, but there are many people looking for the floor there. Ms. Benteler, you now have the floor.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, if China wants it so, they can bring our industry to a halt in Europe because they have that power and they're using their upper hand as a strategic weapon. Recently, for example, they are publishing confidential business secrets, and that makes production more expensive. It endangers our technological security and our very security. We're dependent on rare earths for telephones, defence technologies, solar technologies. We in Europe have very few production places for these sort of things. We have the Critical Raw Materials Act, so we're changing that, but we need to be quicker and more determined. We need to have shorter term measures, more targeted recycling, and maybe look at our own export approach. The industry and the economy needs to work together. We need to take it up a notch for diplomacy. Unfair practices, please name these clearly, call a spade with China and say that these must be brought to a halt. At the same time, in Europe, at all levels, we need to make more progress in quicker fashion and use strategic partnerships, stockpiling, innovation. China is acting in a strategic fashion. We must do the same. It is high time that the EU assumes responsibility and ensures a reliable provision of raw materials for our industrial basis so that European prosperity will still exist tomorrow. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole, prego.
Thank you very much, Mr. Repasi now.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, Frau Kommission.
Madam President of the Commission, colleagues, 300 billion euro, the trade deficit between the EU and China. Are Chinese goods really so much better than European ones? The problem is our companies don't have access to the Chinese market. There are unfair subsidies which make fair competition impossible. And there is a political leadership using economic power as a lever. China demands respect but denies reciprocity. And that is not fair. That is not a partnership, that's an imbalance. Partnership means mutuality, transparency, and respect. Respect for our political culture means that elected representatives are not put under sanctions for what they say. I call for the lifting of China's sanctions against former MEP Reinhard Bütikofer and our colleagues from the member state parliaments. That would be an important signal and a step towards real partnership.
Thank you. Ms. Pirilka.
W tej debacie powinno wybrzmieć to.
Madam President, this debate should be about why the European Union is not an equal partner of the United States or China. The trade deficit, technological dependence, industrial production, which is failing. These are the results of what the European Commission has been doing. China is taking advantage of its superiority and dominance of the rare earth sector. And what are you doing? You have this sick plan to reduce CO2 emissions by 90% to 2040, the European Green Deal. You're fighting fossil fuels. What we need is a trade policy based on the interests of member states, because the greatest continent is soon going to be reduced to poverty as a result of your policies. Thank you.
Marshall.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall.
Chers collègues,
colleagues, in the 1990s, we stopped extracting and refining critical raw materials. Now, 30 years on, due to that lack of strategic vision, we're in an unfortunate position of dependence on China. 60% of rare earths and 40% of the refining is coming from China. Export restrictions pose a risk to our industry and defence. There are 5 key areas where we should act. Reduce use of rare earths if there are reliable alternatives. Diversify partnerships. Not use European agriculture as a bargaining chip. Research into new sources in Europe. Recycle and relocate refining capacity. It's pleasing to note that we are starting to take steps in this direction compared to the anti-growth environmentalists.
Thank you, Mr. Grotos.
Dear Commissioner, Europe faces dual coercion from US tariffs, yes, but far more dangerously from China's strategic chokehold on rare earth exports. Gallium, germanium, no longer reaching our industries. Colleagues, remember that no guided missile can be produced without gallium. It's important because the Chinese foreign minister told High Representative Kallas that Russia may not lose the war. But also, our economic and our industrial survival is at stake. And as President von der Leyen rightly said, this is about dominance, about building dependency, and about state-organized blackmail. Some here still claim this is just collateral damage in the US-China rivalry. It's not. It's about showing who has the power. Some here suggest we strike a deal, drop tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in exchange for the withdrawal of Beijing's retaliatory measures. That's appeasement, it won't work. Feeding the beast won't pacify it. Some here argue that European member states should go for themselves and defend their own industries without the backing of the EU. Don't. It will only invite more coercion in the years to come. I argue differently. Economic leverage is there in Europe, at least theoretically if we use it. So use every tool in the EU economics toolbox. Close markets if necessary. Impose export controls. Sanction Chinese banks fueling Moscow's war of aggression. Leverage what we have or we don't have leverage at all. Commissioner, act with strength for European sovereignty and industrial survival, and above all, don't encourage more coercion. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grigorova.
Dear colleagues, Council, Commission, the upcoming EU-China summit is more than a diplomatic event. It is a test of Union's credibility. We often hear, and we've heard it today from the Commission, that the EU should engage with China as an equal partner, but it's time we actually behave like one. We allow our markets to be flooded with heavily subsidized Chinese goods, and also allow blocking our companies entering Chinese market, undermining them. And, most gravely, we ignore China's support for Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Yes, ignore. I've heard you saying, we are very concerned, we will continue criticizing. When have you ever done that? That has never been done. What's the success of Commission? Has any heavy machinery not been sent from China to Russia thanks to your doing? I've never seen that, and China runs a massive trade surpluses. And after a trade war with the United States, it really needs the European market. And you know what's that called? Leverage. So I thus urge President von der Leyen, or please, Mr. Šefčovič, if you could convey that message because she left, to stand firm in Beijing and defend our strategic interests. And please, our strategic interests are Ukraine, not German cars.
Grazie, onorevole. Prego, onorevole Della Valle.
Mr. Della Valle.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Yesterday, President von der Leyen spoke here in the chamber and said that she'd protect the EU's interests with China. But we've been waiting for that for some time now. We'd like our interests rather than Pfizer or the US's interests to be defended. We're talking about 720 billion euro per year, huge potential for further growth. But when we talk about non-aligned countries that are not in line with the US, we simplify, we oversimplify and talk about good guys and bad guys. If there is a trade war with Trump, defending the interests of Europeans is something that should take account of BRICS importance to European citizens too, and the role that China could play as a mediator in Ukraine and Middle East conflicts. We need to recognise that the world is changing. It's increasingly multipolar. If you really want to defend the interests of Europeans, then you should engage in diplomacy rather than defending a world which is destined to disappear along with those who represent it.
Thank you. Mr. Stoyanov.
Di restare nei tempi.
Please keep to your speaking time.
Благодаря, госпожо председател. Thank you, Madam President. The EU-China summit is an opportunity for us to prove that in this divided world, dialogue is still the strongest instrument to address the divisions. The European Union and China are two leading economies of a joint share of more than 36% in the global GDP. In 2024, yes, there are divisions and differences, but there are solutions to all problems. We need to advance our relations with China, and we should not overlook that. Today, where war is raging in Europe, we need sustainable partnerships and reasonable dialogue. No sanctions will resolve the issues. Over the last 2 years, 50 billion of exports from Europe to China has been affected, and our companies are losing their shares. Europe is still dependent on strategic exports of rare earth elements and other components. The disconnection of these flows will lead to challenges. What is the solution? A dialogue and a true cooperation with the great powers. This is the way for us to guarantee economic growth for Europe. Thank you.
Monsieur Ivanovici.
Ivanov.
Mulțumesc. Da, chiar mă întreb.
Thank you. I think members of the European Parliament deserve more respect from President von der Leyen. Talking about China, I've been working with the Chinese for 30 years as a lawyer. China has always been friends with Russia. We are part of NATO. China and Russia are part of BRICS. I wish we were part of BRICS. They're much more respectful. You want to talk about Taiwan? Big mistake. If you want to talk about Taiwan, you have to expect them to say that they will unite with Taiwan the way that Germany became reunited. There's no point talking about human rights either. The premise is you're basing yourselves on a wrong. You know nothing about international diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zoido.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. We'll be holding a historic summit in a couple of weeks, 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the EU and China. These relations have brought us trade benefits, promoted investment, and created jobs. Nonetheless, in the last few years, we've been through turbulent geopolitical times, and we have a growing imbalance. We need to redress that balance and make sure it is truly reciprocal. We need to maintain the multilateral international order and organizations such as the WTO. There's industrial overcapacity. There are artificially low prices that prevent our companies from competing on a level playing field. We need to look at sensitive products such as dairy, pork products, wine. We need to look at critical raw material export restrictions that endanger our own security, and we need to be more responsible, call on China to be more responsible on the Ukraine conflict. So, EU-China relations. Let's give it a new impetus, let's breathe new life into it, but let's ensure that it is a win-win relationship. Let's not miss this chance. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Annunziata. Thank you, President. Just after the ceasefire with Iran, China allowed Iran to impulse, according to the Chinese foreign minister, and I think that is something we can rely on in terms of source. And we can see that they're also exporting lots of fuel at above market prices. So China's not this anodyne power. Let us not mistake this action. We need to make sure that the best economic protection is those who have a strong military behind it. And I think we need to reopen a dialogue with China. We have to understand what's going on in this country. Let's not neglect human rights. That is a core issue for us. But we should push dialogue with this nation, with China, regardless of the information coming from other nations, especially information on China that we get from the US as well. So dialogue is part and parcel of our strategic independence as well. Thank you very much. Ms. Gyuri.
Thank you, honourable members. In order for the European economy to recover and to improve its competitiveness, it is essential that we establish connections with as many countries as possible. Connectivity can make us stronger. To achieve this, however, we must give up the ideological struggle of dividing the world into good and bad, and only trading with the good. The new geopolitical situation also requires us to recalibrate our relations with China. Let us finally accept that they will never be a democratic constitutional state in our sense of the term, and that we will never agree on everything. Nevertheless, we can still trade with them on the basis of mutual benefits. This relaunch should be the task of the EU-China summit at the end of July. We need to realize that fruitful cooperation is not only possible with like-minded political systems. The US, which has declared China its main enemy, has already been able to reach agreement with Asia's superpower on certain issues. Let us be capable of doing the same. Let us reduce dependence, stand on more than one leg, and of course let us be not naive. Let us make China interested in relations with us. Let us look at what's good for European companies and what creates jobs. Negotiations can only be conducted in the language of mutual respect. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole. Prego.
Thank you very much. Mr. Taczynski is next.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear leftists, China is laughing. China is laughing at you. Russia is laughing. India is laughing. You know why? Because of your eco-madness, because of your eco-God. We are responsible for 7% of pollution of the globe, when China is responsible for 30%, and Madame von der Leyen wants to save the planet with our money. This is madness. This madness will be stopped by people of common sense. We Republicans, we people of common sense will restore Europe, rebuild Europe. It's your fault, communists. It's your fault. Illegal migrants, it's your fault, communists. Eco-God, it's your fault, communists. So do not be like communists, be like Poland. We're gonna give you another King Sobieski very soon. We're gonna restore Europe. We're gonna rebuild it. So do not be like communists, be like Poland. Thank you very much.
Is there a blue card for you? Mr. Tarzinski, is there a blue card if you want? Mr. Dossal, for 30 seconds, please.
That is correct. New Europe, yes, New Europe without communism. The communists, the madness, yes, that's my plan. And I'm going to do it. I will look on.
Dear colleague, I would like to ask for a clarification. You speak against communists, but I'm not aware of communists liquidating the steel industry, liquidating the car industry, liquidating the pharmaceutical industry. From 1949, we were able in Czech Republic to manufacture our own antibiotics, penicillin. Now we are unable. So why are you speaking against communists when the problem is somewhere else? Thank you very much.
Because Stalin was the biggest one to kill people of common sense, of values. There is no bigger threat to the world than the communism and your agenda, your sick agenda, new God, illegal migration is part of communist way of thinking. They even call themselves communists. It's like someone would call themselves a fascist or a Nazi. How can you call yourself a communist. This is a shame, and I'm going to fight the communists till the end of my life. So help me God.
Grazie onorevole, prego.
Thank you very much. Ms. Waldmans is next.
Thank you, mevrouw de...
Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we've heard on several occasions Chinese restrictions of exports of rare earth minerals are one of the greatest challenges to our industry, one of the greatest threats, and we have to start drawing red lines for China. China's not going to enjoy that. They will fight back, but it'd be even worse if we would continue tolerating this as if there was nothing at fault, because that would cost us a lot more. We would see Russification in similar form. So, Mr. Bart Groothuis has mentioned this. There's a clear signal needs to come from you, from the Commission. Strategic autonomy, new supply lines with our allies, within and out with Europe. Be creative, see what's possible. Look at space, look at the oceans. The world is bigger than just the US and China. There's a whole continent that is waiting for Europe, not least Africa. Africa is looking to Europe because we always look down on it. Commission, I hope that you'll have a good, strong summit, straighten your tie and step into the world. Thank you. Ms. Zbayi.
Colleagues, the 4th of April 2025, China banned rare earth exports. For decades now, we've let China to be in a virtually monopoly situation. What about self-determination of peoples? Where is our strategic autonomy there? This neo-colonial extractivism with a circular economy and environmental considerations with protection for workers would be able to not sacrifice people in these ways. We need a unified, democratic, and that influence from China.
Thank you. Mr. Saramon.
Dear Chair, China has shown with raw materials that we are dangerously dependent on it. But China is also dependent on us. When Trump's United States openly attacks both the EU and China, it would be tempting to leave the US to fight with itself. However, China shows every day that it cannot be trusted by supporting Putin's Russia to kill the people of its neighboring countries. Nor must we turn a blind eye to China's own shocking human rights violations, for example in Xinjiang. Since our destinies are intertwined in many ways, China cannot and should not be isolated. However, all strategic dependencies must be broken and the support for killing must end. The EU must also look in the mirror. To be credible in the world stage, Europe itself must stop supporting the genocide in Palestine. Now we are considered hypocrites, and for a good reason.
Grazie. Prego, onorevole Lexman.
Thank you. Ms. Lexman.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Current export control on several minerals is yet another example of the toolbox China uses for its political purposes. Misusing its dominance over rare earths and deliberately causing disruptions in the supply chains is a part of China's trade strategy, which allows them to maintain global dependencies. This puts in danger also healthcare, defense, or our energy sector. I expect that the Commission formally raises the issue of unjustified export controls with the WTO and also uses the anti-coercion mechanism the EU has at its place. It is also high time to accelerate the implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act we agreed upon about 2 years ago. Finally, the upcoming EU-China summit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lange.
Thank you, Madam President, Minister, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. I had a discussion with the important CEO saying that we've been very naive vis-à-vis China. I said we weren't being naive. This was economic policy strategy. Wage costs were low, but the environmental costs were low, and hence the manufacturing is now in China. 70% of lithium is being processed in China, even if it's not mined there. So it's the processing this issue. So this is a question we need to answer, how we want to become more strategically autonomous, how we can strengthen other provisions and supplies from other countries. And this dependency that is our responsibility needs to be got rid of vis-à-vis China. We also want to talk to China, say they act fairly according to WTO rules and stick to that. License fees and the procedures involved with critical raw materials being mined needs to be looked at, and that has to be the object of the summit in July. Thank you.
Is there a blue card for you? Okay. Please, Mr. Sieper, for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Vice President. In accordance with Rule 178 of the procedure of the European Parliament, I would also like to ask you for the possibility to react to the reply that Mr. Lange gives to me right now. Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege, dass Sie die blaue Karte.
Thank you for accepting the blue card. My question is this: what could we do if China did not agree to stop these practices that we're criticizing? What happens if there's no agreement? Thank you.
Well, fortunately, we have beefed up our toolbox. We have the international procurement instrument that we've established that we're now using. We have the foreign subsidies instrument that we've adjusted so that we can apply that, and also made sure that competition conditions are better. The anti-coercion instrument is in our back pocket as well, which means if we do experience political pressure, these are countermeasures that we can put forward. And obviously we can appeal to the WTO. When you work with a partner, you can be clear. If the partner's not playing fair, you can use the measures you have against them.
Please, Mr. Sieper, for your reaction. Mr. Lange, you have to wait here. Yeah. Sorry.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege, für diese Ausführung.
Thank you for that explanation. I can only agree. But I only knew about half of the things that you mentioned. I think your average EU citizen doesn't know any of these. So if we have these instruments, it's important for people to have them explained. Otherwise, people have the impression that the Chinese are leading us by the nose.
Absolutely.
Onorevole, prego, onorevole Tovaglieri.
Thank you. Ms. Tovaglieri. President, Commissioner, the European Commission has succeeded in destroying our national economy and has managed to enrich China with electrification, the forced green transition. We're now all dependent on a communist country, a non-democratic country. Now we're getting bogged down in a Green Deal and a green transition as China produce with no regard for any rules. It's extracting, refining, and charging. We're seeing all these prices going up. Who's going to end up footing the bill? It'll be us. And now we say we want e-vehicles and wind farms and so on. But what about actually producing the basic raw materials that we need in order to engage in production here in Europe? Unfortunately, it seems to be too late now. We've thrown in the towel because we went for a green transition, which is unfortunately just going to leave us empty-handed.
Dear colleagues, in 2 weeks the EU lands in Beijing to mark 50 years of relations with China. It looks like celebration. In truth, is a stress test. The trade still tops 739 billion euros. yet our deficit is 292 billion and exports are falling. State-subsidized overcapacity floods our market while China stays selectively closed. As Commissioner Šefčovič fights in Washington to shield European jobs from blanket US tariffs, Beijing slaps duties on medical devices and cognac, rations rare earth licenses, and declares it cannot accept a Russian defeat in Ukraine. Treat the summit as business as usual, and we tell Washington and Moscow that Europe swaps security for cheap batteries. After 5 decades, China is still no responsible partner. We need thorough de-risking, tightening the investment screening, rebuild critical supply chains with trusted allies, and enforce WTO rules wherever Beijing undercuts fair competition for European workers, business, and innovation. Speak with one transatlantic, not transactional voice. Autonomy built on dependency is not autonomy at all. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole. Prego, onorevole.
Thank you. Ms. Han, and please stick to your speaking time.
Prego, onorevole.
China flutet unser
China is flooding our single market with subsidised overcapacity from toys to steel, and I expect of Ursula von der Leyen that at the EU-China summit she'll find pragmatic solutions for fair trade for our industries. But above all, to make sure that EU doesn't remain so naive vis-à-vis China, because for years we've been fighting this asymmetric dependency and trying to free ourselves from that. As Germany, as the EU, we need to do that. Now, China needs to look at the way that they're restricting our critical raw material access, and they're using it as a weapon. In the fight between autocracy and democracy, let's not forget that China is an autocratic regime that doesn't support democracy and human rights. Look at the Uyghurs, look at Hong Kong, look at Taiwan and the threats there. This is not the time for appeasement, neither vis-à-vis Trump's USA nor to China. It's time to shoulder. We need more trade with more partners, and I'm looking to the Danish presidency bring together the European member states for more free trade, open up more markets for raw materials.
Thank you, Mr. Sherwa.
Wysoka Izbo, żyjemy w czasach, kiedy...
Ladies and gentlemen, we are living at a time of full-scale war in Ukraine. We have difficult transatlantic relations, and now there is to be an EU-China summit. The EU should be assertive towards China for a number of reasons, starting with China's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. Ukraine is being hit by Iranian drones and other weaponry from the Russian Federation. We have to be blunt. We also have to be blunt in terms of strategic autonomy and sovereignty. There is no business as usual at a time of 3 years of war, which is also a genocide.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, President. China is a sixth of humanity now. It's in the UN Security Council, has 30% of industrial production of our planet. It was the main trading partner of 10 countries in 2000, and now it's the main trading partner of 120 countries. This is a huge, complex reality. And one of the main geopolitical and economic challenges that we have in Europe now is how to deal with it. So what will we do in the summit? We need to rebalance our trading relationship, talk about rare earths, breathe new life into multilateralism with new blocs around the world, look at the green agenda, international relations which are based on rules and standards, and we need to mention Ukraine. That's at the heart of our strategic interests, and China needs to get that message. We need to deal with a mature, demanding and constructive manner with China. We should not be naive. We should be firm in strategic terms and have a dialogue which is principles-based.
Onorevole Tionne.
Thank you. Mr. Tionne.
Cacher ses talents pour mieux attendre son heure.
Cometh the hour, cometh the man. And I think Deng Xiaoping had words similar to this. The impressive increase in China's power mirrors the decline in Europe. And we can see that there's no critical response to this. And we're seeing that there's strategic dependencies, meaning that our production is moving to them. The EU has spent the last 30 years thinking about things and thinking about denying aspects of territory and denying geopolitics. And we're seeing that this is coming crashing down around us. Europe will not escape from the power games, and these power games can only be met by recognizing the trade war that is going on at the moment. One of the fronts is vis-à-vis Beijing.
Thank you. Mr. Bushinsky.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, this debate demonstrates how the bureaucracy and the majority in this House has gone off into space without a rocket. What are we talking about? The European Union was 5 times wealthier than China, and this year China's GDP is going to be bigger than the EU's, and this is a result of your crazy, absurd economic policy. This is thanks to Ursula von der Leyen. This is thanks to the Green Deal. This is thanks to bureaucracy. This is thanks to the socialism in this House. You have turned a glorious, wealthy, powerful continent to nothing. Ursula von der Leyen must resign.
Thank you. Mr. Baker.
Mevrouw de Voorzitter. Madam President, Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. In this chamber we talk about strategic autonomy quite often when we're talking about defence, when we're talking about food, when we're talking about medicines. And that's the message, that we need to take the reins into our own hands a bit more so that we can protect our own citizens better in the future. And that applies also for critical raw materials. Without some of these, as you can understand, we would not be able to keep the motor of our civilization going. No smartphones, no electricity, no wind power. And for those critical raw materials, we're extremely dependent on China. 90%, to the tune of 90%. And here, we're not talking about an imbalance in trade. We're talking about strategic weakness, one which China is exploiting, because China decides whether and the way in which critical raw materials can be used and can be imported by Europe. But that is completely unacceptable. At the coming EU-China summit, we cannot pursue business as usual. Europe cannot become the toy of Beijing. We need to address critical raw materials and bang their hand on the table.
Thank you. Mr. Vogelsang.
Kommissar, Minister, kære kolleger.
Commissioner, dear colleagues, China is an important partner for Europe. Trade, cooperation, in light of the big challenges that we have, such as the climate changes. But we have to see that we have become dependent of the big country. Greece has sold its biggest harbor to China, the harbor Piraeus. We have made ourselves dependent of critical raw materials, rare earth. We have made ourselves dependent within the green energy. 95% of everything to do with solar cells come from China. So could we make an agreement that in the future we do not sell critical infrastructure to China. We keep it in Europe, and we do whatever we can to make ourselves independent as for the critical energy. Thank you.
Thank you, President. The EU needs to be firmer and act rapidly with China in terms of the car industry, rare earths, and many other areas. We need to look at their social, labour and environmental laws and ensure that they're not exploiting the situation. They're actually ignoring many international rules. De minimis clauses. We need to look at the access to Chinese markets for ourselves as unfair competition, particularly for smaller family-run companies. They're propping up their own industries, and our social model is in danger. We need to look at the issue of competitiveness and the extent to which there is unfair competition. We see distortion there, but the time has come to act. If we can generate jobs and we can defend our industries, then we'll be in a stronger position to defend our own values.
Monsieur le Commissaire,
Commissioner, as the Presidency reminded us, there are many differences between us and China. Russia policy, economic policy, raw material sanctions against members. But China is an essential global actor, and it would be irresponsible to disrupt a dialogue with Beijing. The EU must defend its interests and values while pursuing honest dialogue without giving lectures and demonstrating mutual comprehension. But I think it is also necessary, Commissioner, to be firm and to show China that the European Union is a vast market. And we could take decisions which could be bad for us, but bad also for China. So I am in favor of a dialogue with China.
Prego, onorevole.
First message. Engagement policies and economic dependence on autocratic regimes are dangerous. This is exactly what happened to us with Putin's Russia. Let's not make the same mistakes. Second, the EU-China Trade and Investment Agreement cannot be ratified until China stops its economic coercion against EU member states. China's economic coercive actions against Lithuania and the EU back in 2021 grossly violated the legal norms of the World Trade Organization. These discriminatory trade restrictions directed at an EU member state challenge the unity of the entire bloc. Failing to take appropriate action against China's economic coercion will cause long-term damage to the reputation of the European Union as a reliable geopolitical actor.
Grazie, onorevoli.
Thank you. We'll now have a quick catch the eye. Mr. Myanmar. Thank you. The upcoming summit with China is a good opportunity to raise bilateral and global issues at the highest level. The bilateral relationship is not going through a good period. We have this growing trade deficit, particularly due to our industry's difficulties in accessing the Chinese market. They block access to critical minerals too, while their companies enjoy benefiting from our markets. We need a level playing field. We also need greater diversification of markets, and we need to continue with de-risking. This summit will also be an opportunity to work on global challenges together, pandemics, drug trafficking, illegal fisheries, peace, and also the green transition. We need to look at China's relationship with Russia too. China should be contributing to peace rather than helping the aggressor. We also need to ensure that dual-use exports to China do not end up going into Russian arms. It's an increasingly complex world. China as a superpower has global responsibilities. It needs to shoulder them, and we need to stress that at the summit.
Prego, onorevole Grappini.
Thank you, Ms. Grappini.
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, 50 years of relations with China, and if we take stock, we can see what we've lost in 50 years. We've lost so much. I think we have to be clear at the summit. We have to be able to defend ourselves. We've been talking about the parcels that come from China, billions of parcels. We need a relationship with China, but it has to be based on healthy principles, Commissioner. Why don't we have the same public procurement rules as China? If they can be restrictive, why can't we be restrictive? We have our security considerations too. We don't have good relations with the United States. We don't have good relations with China. We don't have good relations with Russia.
Vi chiedo di stare nel minuto perché siamo...
Please stick to 1 minute because we have very limited time.
Madam President, it's hard to believe that some politicians call for reduced states, our closest ally, while simultaneously pushing for closer ties with China. That systematically violates human rights, oppresses minorities, and steals European technology is a serious security threat. The balance of trade between Europe and China is already sharply in China's favor, in favor of a communist dictatorship that has long traditions of using economic relations as a tool for political pressure. Europe should not build stronger trade relations with a country whose representative for European relations questions the independence of sovereign Eastern European states that seceded from the Soviet Union. This says enough. The growth of Chinese influence in Europe must be prevented. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole, prego onorevole Zelimas.
Thank you. Member Zelimas.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, as the President of the Commission emphasized yesterday, when we go to China to defend our interests, Europe must show strength. And this strength only comes through our unity. Unity must be based on our common values. Therefore, we must have in mind several important aspects. First, China's position in Russia's war against Ukraine. China's support to the aggressor cannot be tolerated. Second, inadmissibility of political, economic and diplomatic pressure on individual EU member states, for example on Lithuania. Third, inadmissibility of the use of or threat of force against the liberal democracy in Taiwan, which is freely established and developed on the same principles as ours. Fourth, stopping the destruction of the unique identity of the Tibetan people, as well as interference into their religious freedom. Fifth, seizing the grave breaches of human rights against Uyghurs in Hong Kong and elsewhere in China. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Zacharia.
Η Κίνα δεν είναι εμπορικός εταίρος, είναι εμπορικός ανταγωνιστής. Πρώτα η
Thank you very much. China is a rival in trade for us. Industry has seen a massive shift of its business to China. And China's been buying up strategic infrastructure such as the port of Piraeus and is buying up other European ports as well. We're seeing that restricted workers' rights are in place there. There are accidents at work, there's environmental pollution and other threats. In the Petition Committee, there are 3 petitions concerning Costco in Piraeus. It seems there are no rights for people in China, and often China acts in an undiplomatic way as well. Maybe the Greek scandal is something that will move people, seeing what's happening in Greece. We're losing sovereignty, but nobody's listening to us. So it is a problem. We have to do our utmost to get these things back.
I welcome the EU-China summit that's happening in the near future, because we do need a reset of relationships between the European Union and China. We need to have reciprocity, we need to have mutual respect and fairness, we need to have access to the Chinese market for European companies, we need to ensure that we wean our dependency off China in the certain areas of raw materials and rare earths, and we need to insist on a rules-based order. International rules-based order, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations and the others that keep this world revolving around fairness and respect for each other. On the issue of Ukraine, we have to call it out straight. China is actively supporting Russia in the war in a European country. And that has to be said very loud and clearly. We can't have a situation where we dance around this particular fact. And until such time as China says clearly that they respect the international integrity of the Ukrainian borders, well then we must always call them out. But I wish the summit well, because we do need a reset and we need to rebalance it, ensuring that it's in Europe's favour as well.
Grazie onorevole. Prego onorevole Andriukaitis.
Thank you. Mr. Andriukaitis.
Please.
Norėčiau pritarti Komisijos pateiktai pozicijai ir išties paraginti.
The position of the President of the Commission leads me to say that in any discussions, the primacy of international law is paramount. And China must be made to understand that Russia's war against Ukraine must stop, because it undermines international law. It undermines the principle of the rule of law. It's very important for this to be raised with China in a pragmatic way. Territorial integrity is paramount.
Grazie onorevole. L'ultimo.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Oliveira.
Obrigado, President. Thank you, President. There's a danger of war. We should build peaceful solutions. With the danger of confrontation, we should build bonds of cooperation for the mutual benefit of our peoples. That should be our approach to relations with China, and more specifically for the upcoming summit. The EU should not be an echo chamber of the policy of escalation and confrontation of the US. They point the finger at China as the source of all ills. We should have effective cooperation, respect for international law, include the principle of non-interference, and one China policy without any exceptions. We should have political, diplomatic, economic and cultural relations in a mutually beneficial way, so that our people's needs can be taken into account. And we should go down that path with respect for member states to decide on their own foreign policy and bilateral relations, particularly I'm thinking here of Portugal-China as a relationship based on peace and cooperation between the peoples of Portugal and China.
Thank you, Mr. Šefčovič, to wind up.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Madam Ministers, honourable members. I know that we are very much pressed by the time, and we expect the arrival of the Prime Minister of Denmark, so I'll be very, very short. First and foremost, I would like to thank all the honourable members for their interventions, which for sure will contribute to the final preparation of the EU-China summit. And I also would like to appreciate that there was what I would describe overall support for our approach to the risk, but not to decouple in relations with China. And it was very clearly the motto and the guidelining principle the Commission was following since the start of the mandate. If you allow a couple of words on the risking, because the honourable MEPs Lange, Maniatis, Mr. Eroglu, Keller, but especially Madame Bentele, been highlighting how important it is to get better access to the critical raw materials. And I think that I have in particular to thank Madame Bentele for exceptional work done on the critical raw materials report, because thanks to her, I believe we open new chapters, how to increase the economic security of the European Union. Based on that report and with the new approach of the European Commission, we already completed the first selection process of more than 60 projects if it comes to the critical raw materials, 47 in Europe and 13 outside. And I believe that this exercise, which will be repeated and which will be now tested into getting these projects from the paper into the real operation, will demonstrate how serious we are about being more independent if it comes to the supply of critical raw materials. Coming back to China, I can also reassure you that all the issues you've been clearly highlighting, and be it the trade restriction in the field of agriculture, cosmetics, pharmaceutical business, or in public procurement, they are permanently raised on the technical level, but also by me in my regular interactions with the Chinese Trade Minister Wang Wentao, and that we are permanently pushing for the resolution of these issues. But to conclude, I agree with all of you that what we need in Europe is to build stronger resilience, and for that the policies which we charted together, like Net Zero Industrial Act, being stronger in getting the critical raw materials to Europe, improve our competitiveness would be the best responses to all challenges which are ahead of us. All the political issues in relation to the human rights, to the war in Ukraine, and overall global geopolitics for sure will be raised by the leaders in the summit, as it was indicated by the President of the Commission and by the representative of the Presidency. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Commissario.
Thank you, Commissioner. Minister Bjerre, for the conclusion now, please.
President, honourable members, commissioners, thank you for a good debate. Many important topics was mentioned: imbalanced trade, support for Ukraine, respect for human rights, partnerships on global issues such as climate, together with many other issues. EU-China relations are complex, as many of you said. We value the trade and economic relationship with China, but it must benefit both sides. Mr. Pascal de la Puerta from EPP, Maniatis from S&D, and Irugla from Renew, together with many of other colleagues, all mentioned trade and control of earth material. So I want to elaborate a little bit more on that issue. Our trade relations with China remain, unfortunately, unbalanced, both in terms of trade and investments. We have long-standing concerns about lack of level playing field and the significant asymmetry in our respective market openings. In addition, China's economic model has led to systemic distortions with negative spillovers to trading partners. EU firms have continued to face forced localization policies and restrictions on their access to the Chinese market, as well as pressure resulting from overcapacities. The deficit in trade in goods has been widening over the last decade, fueled by illegal subsidies. Last year, the EU-China trade deficit reached 304.5 billion euros. A more recent headache is the export control measures on rare earth and related products introduced by China that impact EU producers. The EU will continue to reduce critical dependencies and vulnerabilities, including the supply chains, and will de-risk and diversify where necessary and appropriate. We do not intend to decouple or to turn inwards. A balanced relationship built on fairness and reciprocity in our common interest. This will be the message that the EU will deliver to China at the summit, seeking to press China to concrete steps in addressing them. As regards Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, China has spoken out in favor of peace, but we need to see actions to follow these words. Engagement and cooperation remain essential, including on human rights, as mentioned by Minister from the Greens and by many others. We are committed to working with China to improve bilateral relations and to address concerns through dialogue where possible. At the same time, we must remain firm in protecting our interests and our values. We need to find long-term solutions to tackle global challenges and ensure that the rule-based international order is upheld, with the UN Charter at the core. Thank you very much once again, and thank you for your attention.
Grazie Ministro. Comunico di aver...
Thank you, Minister. There are several resolutions we received to wind up the debate. The debate's closed. The vote will take place on Thursday.